This episode is sponsored by our trusted lawyers. If you have any legal queries or require representation, contact Miriam Altaf.
If you'd like to advertise your company, feel free to get in touch.
London Street Legends presents The Final Night, Episode 1. According to court documents, at approximately 12:23 a.m. on the 8th of April 2006, Sparks was dropped off at a bar in Lewisham, where he was involved in an altercation with a man named Michael Williams. Sparks, who was disqualified from driving at the time, recruited Sean Albert as his driver. After the altercation, Albert was asked to drive towards Pendrell Road in Brockley, southeast London, where Sparks would meet with Miss Sarita Barry. As they arrived on Pendrell Road, Sparks remained in the car while Albert went and knocked on the door. However, there was no answer. Evidence suggests that Miss Barry was dropped off at Camberwell to top up her gas meter card when Sparks and his driver Albert first went to her address. The two men then went to Sparks' sister's house. According to court documents, after 5 to 10 minutes, Wanago was overheard by his driver on the phone to Miss Barry asking her, "Are you in the house?" He was then heard saying that he would be making his way. Albert drove Sparks back to Pendrell Road as he watched him walk towards the house, whereupon he heard a number of gunshots being fired from the bottom of the steps. A person wearing a furry coat was seen escaping the scene, but Albert could not provide a further description. As the shooting happened, Sparks started to run before suddenly collapsing on the street. He asked Albert to be taken to his brother's house nearby, but when the brother was not in, Albert called the emergency services. During the drive, Albert answered 3 calls on Sparks' phone, each of which emanated from Miss Barry. Andrew, Sparks Wanago, was murdered at 01:30 a.m. on the 8th of April 2006 by a single gunshot wound to the heart. Let's have a look at the prosecution's case and what they believed to be the motives. Before the trial began, the prosecution believed that Delphon Nicholas, a childhood friend of the deceased, had orchestrated the execution while in custody at HMP Belmarsh with the use of an illicit mobile phone. They believed that Trevor Denny, also an ex-friend of the deceased, was either the gunman or a party to the shooting, and that Miss Barry had lured the deceased to her home. As for the motives, the prosecution highlighted things that could have been possible motives. In Michael Williams' case, it was that he had been involved in an altercation with the deceased just a few hours before the fatal shooting. As for Delphon Nicholas, an event that occurred on the 14th of February 2006 was suggested as a possible motive by the prosecution. Leslie Nicholas, Delphon's father, had been on his own, driving his car, whereupon the deceased had allegedly jumped in, punched Mr. Nicholas in the face, got him out of the car, and driven off. With regard to Trevor, the motive didn't seem clear. However, there are court documents to suggest that in November 2005, Denny telephoned Sparks' girlfriend and the mother of his child. Speaking to her, he said that he had had enough of the deceased, who had gone too far. He said that the deceased was barred from the New Cross area and that he had spoken to the brother of the deceased, and that he felt sorry that her baby would have no father. He repeated the threat. It is important to highlight that Sparks' girlfriend stated that she later received a text message from Denny to the effect that he and the deceased were going to meet to fight. Trevor Denny denies ever making these statements to Sparks' girlfriend. There is no evidence to suggest that Trevor and Sparks ever had a fight. In fact, there is mention of a possible meeting between Trevor and Sparks at the Honeypot Caribbean takeaway restaurant situated on Lewisham Way just 4 days before the murder. Now let's have a look at what the defense claimed. Delphon Nicholas, also known as Del P, was arrested for the offense of possession of a firearm without a certificate and possession of ammunition in April 2002. He was sentenced to a total of 3 years imprisonment. Nicholas ran off with a metal object that he discarded while running. It was a firearm manufactured to fire blanks that had been modified to fire live ammunition. The magazine, which was also recovered, contained 2 shells. Del P contended that referencing his prior conviction in court may have compromised his ability to receive a fair trial. However, the judge admitted the conviction under Section 101(1)(d) of the Criminal Justice Act 2003, deeming it relevant to a key issue in dispute between the prosecution and defense. His legal team also made it clear that, as he was in prison at the time of the shooting, he couldn't have killed Sparks. With regard to telephone evidence, Del P claimed that he had no involvement with the telephone number ending in 830, a phone number suspected of having made and received phone calls to and from the other defendants on the night of the shooting. He went on to claim another prisoner by the name of Dion Colliard was in possession of the phone at the time. A substantial body of evidence was presented that linked Nicholas to the recipients of calls from 830 and those who made calls to the number. As a result, during cross-examination, Del P altered his testimony and admitted to lying to the court about having access to the phone number ending in 830. Trevor Denny's defense. According to evidence given in court, Denny's case was that he had been getting his haircut at Chris Cuts at the time of the shooting. He also stated that he was then dropped home by his barber. However, when questioned, his barber, Chris Frith, explained that he was frequently open until midnight or 2 a.m., but was unable to recall whether Denny had gotten a haircut that night, being only contacted 8 weeks before the trial. He said that he often dropped Denny at home if he was the last customer. The telephone number ending in 025, which the Crown attributed to Denny, had been picked up by cell site evidence by the crime scene. However, according to court evidence, Trevor's defense was that the phone was taken and used by Hishak Palmer, a friend and drug dealer partner of his, who was using it specifically in order to arrange drug deals. Sarita Barry gave evidence to the effect that she had not been part of a plan to kill the deceased. She described her own drug dealing activities and explained that her contact with the deceased at the time was related to drugs. She said that the person with whom she spoke on the 025 number was Palmer and not co-accused Denny. However, Del P had mentioned that he had spoken to Denny on the number ending with 025. In conclusion, at about 1:30 a.m. on the night of the 7th of April 2006, Andrew Wanago, the deceased, was murdered when he was walking towards the home of Sarita Barry at 1 Pendrell Road, Brockley, southeast London. He was killed by a single gunshot wound to the heart by a gunman who the Crown alleged was waiting for him as he approached the bottom of the steps to the house. Michael Williams and a man named Erin Cato were acquitted of murder. Sarita Barry was also acquitted of murder. Even though there was no scientific evidence to put Trevor Denny at the scene, he, along with Delphon Nicholas, was convicted of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. In an exclusive 2020 prison phone interview, Delphon Nicholas explains why he was convicted of Sparks' murder.
I'm appealing my conviction, so I cannot really go into the specific details of the case. I can only reiterate the prosecution's case against me, and they say that traditionally me and Sparks were best friends. We were very tight way before Trevor or any other of those guys came into the picture. We used to sleep at each other's houses, we used to see each other every day after school. We used to cook dozens of food every with the YHP, which we get back then. Years later, after Trevor came into the picture, things were very different. I became close with Lee Murray, who went on to stick with £53 million Tunbridge House. Sparks and Trevor became quite close during my time away. When I got back, I guess Sparks resented me for having made loads of money with Murray. Fast forward 10 years, me and Sparks fell out. He was by far the best fighter in the area, and maybe even South London itself. So they won the fight. Next time I saw him was in Elmley prison. I threw hot water and sugar in his face, tried to chop him in his neck, but I just scratched him. This was the initial motive that the prosecution used against me for his murder. I was then arrested for his attempted execution outside of Inner London Crown Court, where someone disguised as a woman apparently fired a volley of shots at him as soon as he bust case and stepped out of court. I was then also accused of shooting the guy that was with him when we had our fight. So all of these accusations were then stacked against me and used to demonstrate my so-called ill intent towards my ex-best friend. So the Crown say that I then sent Trevor to kill him on my behalf because as far as everyone was concerned, I was the one at war with Sparks and not Trevor. That's why my phone contact with Trevor that night was seen as suspicious, and that's why I was convicted for orchestrating and ordering Sparks' murder.
Denny and Nicholas appealed their convictions in 2011. However, their appeal was unsuccessful. 10 years later, in March 2021, Delphon Nicholas passed away inside HM Prison Whitemoor. It is important to mention that in some circumstances, court documents do not transpire what actually happened outside of court. After nearly 20 years behind bars, Trevor Denny still maintains his innocence. Our prayers go out to Sparks' friends and family.
This episode is sponsored by our trusted lawyers. If you have any legal queries or require representation, contact Miriam Altaf.